Welcome. In this presentation, I just want to give you a real quick review or overview of the knowledge test construction assignment that you have coming up. Now, with this assignment, there are two different things I want you to be aware of. First of all, the purpose of a knowledge test in and of itself, and the purpose of this assignment. So the purpose of a knowledge test by itself is to give students that opportunity to demonstrate what they know, what they've learned from the teacher's instruction related to the cognitive domain. Remember, we need to be assessing in physical education all three different domains: the psychomotor, the cognitive, and the affective domain. And this is just one way of doing that. A lot of teachers will go through that process and just say, you know what, I want to give a knowledge test to my students, whether it be multiple choice or a short answer, and they'll just develop some real quick questions that they think the students should know. But there is a process that should be followed when you're developing a knowledge test for students in physical education. So the purpose of this assignment is for you as the student in this class to demonstrate your understanding of all the steps required for the proper development of a knowledge-based test in physical education. So I'm leaving this open to you to think about what activities, skills, concepts that you want to assess. So the goal behind this is for you to develop a realistic test. So it should be something that you think can be quickly or easily administered in a physical education setting. So you're developing an authentic test. Don't think of it as an assignment for this class. Think of it as a realistic test that you want to give to students to cover a particular content area or some subject or some information that you've taught in a physical education class. Now, the first thing you want to do when you do this is start to outline kind of the structure or the format of the test. What is it that you want to test on? How many questions are you going to include in that? And so what you're going to do is create this table of test specifications. Now, the textbook goes through this pretty well, gives you a lot of information on understanding the test or the table of test specifications. So be sure you take a look at chapter 6 of the Miller text, because it does go through this process. But basically what this does is it includes the kinds of test questions that you're going to ask, the content areas, whether you are going to test the students on a particular strategy, their knowledge of strategy, their knowledge of the rules or history of a game or sport. You may have different scenarios, situational, different types of descriptions within the test that you want to test students' knowledge of. So you're going to list all of that here. So you have your content area, you have your types of questions that you're going to ask. You're going to list how many questions in each one of those areas you're going to have, in addition to the percentage or the emphasis covered in those particular areas. So you develop this table of test specifications to really provide the basis or the guidelines for your final test. Now, some things that you also need to include in your assignment: you need to also include the grade level that the test is designed for. This can just be a simple, brief statement at the top of the test. For example, this test is designed for 7th graders in physical education. Very simple, very straightforward. You also need to include how many points possible there are for the total test, and this can be done within the introduction, within the descriptions, or within some other heading, so students know how many points possible this test is. Many times teachers will think of a test and say, okay, this test is going to be 100 points, and then they go through kind of a back end approach and say, okay, well, how many points should this question be? All of that should be taken care of in the table of test specifications. That's the reasoning that you go through this. So not all tests are going to be worth 100 points. It's easy to round off, and it's easy to determine the percentage of that, but not all tests need to be that many points. So you will include the total points possible for the test that you've developed. Then you're going to include an introductory statement to the test taker, and this can just be a very fairly straightforward, simple statement that says, this is the purpose of this test, these are the concepts or the topics that are going to be covered on the test, these are the things that you should know. So a couple of sentences, just real quick statement on an introductory kind of guidelines for the test. Then you're going to have specific directions for completing the test. Sometimes people neglect this, but students will kind of go through this quickly. They'll complete a test without looking at directions or instructions, and then as a teacher you'll get this back and you'll say, well, how come the student didn't follow directions? So be sure you have clear, understandable directions for completing the test. Do you want students to circle a multiple choice response as opposed to bubbling something in, underlining it, blacking it out? Can students write on the test, or are they going to take the test with a Scantron or something else, or a notebook? So all these things need to be clarified in the directions for completing the test. Then you're going to include all of your test questions. Again, this should be designed as if you were going to hand this to students to complete the test. So make sure that it's properly formatted, it follows a logical order, and oftentimes you want to include the true-false questions first because that minimizes anxiety. Teachers will develop a test with the easier questions early on so students start to feel confident as they're going into the test, and then sometimes people look at it as a trick, but it's not necessarily a trick, it's just a test development skill or strategy. So you have confidence going into the test, and then you lead slowly into the more challenging questions or types of questions you have. So as you develop your tests, be sure that you include 5 true-false questions, 5 multiple choice questions, 5 matching type questions, 2 short answer responses. And the difference between a short answer response and an essay: a short answer can be responded to with 1 sentence, as opposed to an essay, which needs to have maybe a paragraph type of response minimum to it. So you have 2 short answer questions, 2 essay type questions. Now be sure that all of your questions are uniquely different. What I mean by that is, if you ask a true-false question, you can't rephrase the same concepts or content that's covered in that true-false question to include it in a multiple choice question, or you can't include the same information in the matching. So be sure that each question alone in and of itself is uniquely different from every other question. Then you want to include a scoring or answer key. This should be on a separate page. How would you score the test? So for example, true, false, just list which ones are true, which ones are false, identify the correct multiple choice ones, identify the correct matching, and then for your short answer, you need to write out what you think or what you feel would be the most appropriate response to each short answer question. So you have a guideline on how to assess this when someone goes back in to assess it. The same thing for the essay type question. Develop a response that you would look at and say, this is a perfect score for the essay response. You need to write those out. You need to include those on a separate, piece of paper, a separate page within your document. And then lastly, explain your final scoring or grading. How many percentage or how many points are received that equals an A, how many equal a B, how many equal a C, and so on and so forth. So you have this nice unique breakdown of assessing the particular test that you have. So once you've gone through all those steps, you've included that, that's your document. That is your assignment. Once again, be sure that you look at the assignment guidelines, because there are specific guidelines and some expectations listed there. There is some information in the textbook that will help you with that in Chapter 6, in addition to looking at the rubric for how I will assess this assignment as well. So take a look at all those different things. Like I mentioned before in the other presentation, I will be kind of in and out of service as far as cell service, and I won't have access to internet during the week. I'll try to check in periodically to get back to you, but if you do have questions, let me know and I'll try to get to those as soon as I possibly can. Okay, that's it. Take care for now, and we will see you later.